Hello, today we're going to be talking about elasticity, and in 15 minutes I'm going to try to go through as many of the high value marks as we can for the exam. It's not going to be comprehensive though, so if you need to go through any of these particular areas, do look at your textbook, Econ Plus Style, whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, the first thing, the definitions. Something that I wanted to point out straight away was the keywords responsiveness that's coming up in all those definitions, and proportionately as well in the elastic and inelastic definitions. Get those right and you've learnt a good deal of the definitions. Okay, we're going to go through looking at analysing and evaluating effectively using those elasticities, avoiding common mistakes, and if we get time, where we could apply them to other areas of the course. So if you want to, in section A or section B, in a 4-mark question, or a 10, 12 mark question, you want to use these elasticities, you're going to have to first of all straight away put the formula in. The big thing there is UQ before UP. You put the quantity demanded or supplied on the top. You've got to put that quantity on the top. And as a general rule, the dependent variable goes above the independent. The independent variable is simply the variable, the cause, down here, and the effect up on the top, if that makes more sense to you. Once you put your formula in, you need a keyword. Keywords they vary for the different elasticities, but if I'm going to be using PD or PS, I would probably want to be using either inelastic or elastic and explaining what that means, using the word proportionately or percentage. If I'm using cross elasticity or YED, then I've got my different words that I need to use there, substitutes for the negative relationship, complements for the positive, and again, inferior, the negative relationship, and normal, the positive. If you're not too sure what those words mean, go back to the Quizlet set and learn them. Once I've done that, I'm then going to need to use a relevant diagram. For PED, that's one of the most obvious ones. You're looking at using a demand curve, which has a significance. The significance is of the slope, the gradient of the curve. Something that is really nice to do there is if you're using a data response, you could put, say for example, the price of the good there, for example. You might even be able to put the quantity there as well. Or you could also put in, say, for example, a percentage change there as well and say, look at that. I divide those across each other and I get a 0.5 elasticity for those. Adding things onto the axes is a really useful thing to do and gets you a lot of marks. The other thing that's relevant there as well is these boxes A, B, and C. You could get total revenue from that as well, and you could say that your total revenue has gone from B plus C to A plus B, and so therefore my total revenue has risen because box A is bigger than box C. A is gained, C is lost. So in that way, you could use your diagram as well. Again, probably another 2 marks there that you just picked up with not very much work and very, very quick there. PES, if you were to use it, the important thing here is not the gradient. Now, these 2 diagrams kind of hint that it might be the gradient that's doing it. It's actually not. It's the intercept on the y-axis. So there we see that the inelastic supply curve is intercepting the x-axis. The elastic supply curve is intercepting the y-axis. The actual gradient of the curve doesn't actually affect the fact that it's elastic. All of those curves are all elastic. Well, it may affect the elasticity. It doesn't. None of those curves are inelastic, and likewise, none of these curves are also elastic either. So all of those curves you see on the left-hand side are inelastic. All of those curves you see on the right-hand side are elastic. Again, if you can put in an example, you might get a diagram, for example, and you get, say, price data that goes like this, and it says from 2007 to 2010. There we go. I've got pricing data. This is the price of copper, for example. I don't know. And perhaps you could then put this price here on the axis. That would be very nice to draw it from the diagram. Okay, once we've done that, this is where it gets a little bit more difficult. And you want to give an interpretation of an example elasticity. And I think this is where a lot of people don't want to stick their necks out. I don't think that they want to give an example because they don't know what it is. The most important thing to say here is that elasticities are not known. We don't actually know the elasticities of all goods. So it's absolutely fine to give an example elasticity, make one up if it's not given to you in the text. That's absolutely fine. If it is given to you, then use the one in the text. And as a rule of thumb, I would always just use two different ones, 0.5 and 2. Two really easy numbers to work with. 0.5 for the 10% increase in the independent variable, so that would be the price generally, that would lead to half as much percentage change in the other variable, that's the quantity. So for example, for PD, if the price went up by 10%, that would just simply means the quantity demanded would go down by 5%. Now, if you did that for 2, for example, just to say that would be a negative 0.5, by the way, if it were price elasticity demand, because it's a negative relationship. If it were 2, then that would be 20% instead of 5%. And so they're just easy numbers to work with, and it's just one sentence, and it's a sentence which just really shows you understand the relationship really well. The difficulty in all this is that the different elasticity values have different numbers associated with them and different ranges of numbers, which take some learning. For PED, you've always got a negative sets of numbers. And so really all you're going to be talking about is elastic, a responsive relationship, and inelastic, a less responsive relationship. You're not going to talk about positive numbers because we assume that as the price goes up, the quantity demanded doesn't go up. It always goes down. XED. Here you've got both positive and negative. You could use -2, a 10% increase in the price of AirPods. Let's say a 10% increase in the price of iPhones results in a 20% fall in the quantity demanded of AirPods. These are close complements. We might say that a 10% increase in the price of iPhones results in possibly a 5% fall in the quantity demanded for watches, Apple Watches. We could say that they're more distant complements. Now, I personally think that a watch is more of a distant complement than an AirPod, and so I would maybe say that the number is smaller, but I've got no idea. I'm just making this up, but it sounds really good because it shows you understand the numbers. Likewise, substitutes. You've got a distant substitute, perhaps say, for example, Coke and Pepsi. As the price of Coke goes up, the demand for Pepsi falls. Say the price of Coke goes up by, say, 10%. The demand for Pepsi goes up, say, by 5%, because they're branded goods. They're quite distant. I just realised I've got a typo there. That should be substitute. And close substitutes, for example, bread. You've got two types of bread. As the price of one type of bread goes up to 10%, the other demand for the other type of bread, Hovis and Warburtons, for example, goes up by 20%. YED, you've got inferior goods, very sensitive inferior goods there. That might be Aldi and Lidl, for example. As our income goes up, our demand for those goods goes down. They're inferior goods. My luxury normal goods, very sensitive, perhaps yachts, for example, luxury yachts. As my income goes up, the demand for those goes up by a lot more. So, for example, my income goes up by 10%, again, a 20% increase in the demand for those. So you could use that same logic, the same point for all of them. Finally, PES as well, you could do elastic and inelastic using 0.5 and 2 as well. So that is the difficult part, and that is really the bit that needs the most revision. Finally, you can give a reason and argue both ways, and this is your evaluation. Your evaluation is now a little bit more difficult, and for PED, I would go with this table here. So you could ask yourself, are there close substitutes? Let's do just 2 examples. Commuting to London by car, are there close substitutes? Well, yes, there are. There's a train. For most people, that would be considered to be a close or even better substitute. Is it branded? No. That means that it's going to be a lot more elastic as a result. Is there a strong need? Well, yes, absolutely. I really need to get to work, and London is where high-wage jobs are located. Is there a potential for new substitutes in the future? Well, I can't imagine us flying into London, really, I don't think, and not at the moment, I don't think, so I don't think we're going to get many more substitutes in the future to commuting to London by car. But as a result, you would argue that it's probably pretty elastic, and the congestion charge showed that actually commuting into London by car was very elastic. And when they charged people to go into London, a lot of people switched over to the train or other public transport. You don't have to mention all of those. In a question, you might only just mention one, but it might be mentioned in the text, and that would be something to raise. Cigarettes, close substitutes, well, that's a difficult one. It used to be no, now we do. Is it branded? Yes, it is. Is there a strong need? Yes, there is. And is there potential for new substitutes in the future? Well, yes, there are. So that's a difficult one. Cigarettes are likely to be very inelastic for old people. For older people, they don't consider e-cigarettes to be close substitutes. They're very persuaded by the brand. They have a very strong need because they have the habit. And so for them, it's likely to be inelastic. However, over time, the potential for the new substitutes has already happened, actually. And right now, cigarettes are becoming more elastic. So that's something to argue about. If you are arguing about XED, you need to argue about the closeness of the substitute, and we've kind of already done that with AirPods and watches, with regard to complements. You might argue that AirPods are closer complements to the iPhone than the Apple Watch, but then that all depends on the consumer, and it might depend on different countries as well. The closeness of the substitute, you could give the example of for example, PCs and laptops. Some people might think that a PC is the same thing as a laptop. If you're just sending an email, it is. However, if you are doing video editing or gaming, then maybe it's not. So you can argue it both ways. YD, exactly the same thing. Different people consider different things to be luxuries. People consider different things to be inferior goods, and so different consumers are going to react in different ways. But it does depend on sometimes the branding and the way in which consumers view the good. Finally, PES. Now this is a difficult one, so easy to mix up with PED. You've got to ask yourself a few questions here. Let's talk about houses. Does it take a long time to produce? If the price of houses go up, can I supply more just right now? Well, I certainly can't build them, not right now, because it takes a long time to produce. So it takes a long time to produce. Yes, it does. Is it easy to store in warehouses? Can I release stocks of houses from a warehouse? Well, no, of course you can't. Are the factors of production mobile? Well, what do I use to make houses? For example, I use builders. I use bricklayers. I can't really use supermarket workers or restaurant workers or really any other workers really to switch over. It's actually quite difficult to do it. So I would argue that they're not mobile. You can't switch over from something else. Natural constraints we're not really going to talk about here. So the likely PES, certainly in the short run, is very inelastic. Increase in housing prices probably not going to give you a lot more supply. Hair clips, on the other hand, very quick to produce, so it does not take a long time to produce. You can release them from your warehouse, or you could get another plastic producing factory to switch over from producing, say, toys and produce them like that. And therefore it's going to be very elastic. So for the hair clips, as the price of them goes up, you could suddenly produce them quickly, you could release them from a warehouse, and you could switch over from other production. I'm just going to leave it at that point there.